Okay, greetings everybody. I'm Mark Morey, your host in the Future of Work webinar series that A Connected Leader is putting on these last couple weeks. We're in our final week here. Our guest will be Deb Coviello. And what we're chewing on here is what is going on in all of these big disruptions in work right now. The Great Resignation, existential crises, dealing with brand new scenarios with working from home, all sorts of challenges around what does it mean to be a human being in the workplace anymore. So I put together a talk series to really dig into these topics, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Deb's perspective on it. The sub-theme that we're really working on is what does it mean to make the workforce and workplace more human-oriented? And so the framing is around redesigning business for human well-being, connection, and therefore effectiveness. And so we're looking at these big topics around, well, one pressing element is the Great Resignation. This has been coined. Some 40% of the workforce are actively seeking another job. So that's pretty destabilizing as a manager or an executive. What is going on there? And then there's work-life balance, or perhaps that's a myth, work-life integration somehow. Do we need to press for a 4-day work week? Do people get to do remote and have a lot of flexibility, work asynchronously? What does that look like to have a life connected to your family or your community as well as the workplace? All the business disruptions that are going on are also obviously the context here. Our business is going to survive this, and what do they need to do to stay adapting and innovating new solutions, new relationships to the market? And then ultimately, the other pillar that we're looking at is around developing resilience, and particularly around mental health and burnout, which has been labeled as epidemic. So those are the big topics we're looking at, and through each speaker's experience as offering their perspective and solutions. So as your host, my background is around human connection. If I could say anything, I'm a human connection specialist, and I have a whole history in working with leadership development around this capability. And the context has been traveling to other communities worldwide and really working on developmental methodologies for raising really awake and healthy, connected children and adults and families, but also at the community and organizational levels. So I've been bringing these technologies to the workplace and just seeing how much of a need there really is. It's at times like a desert seeking water, and I have questions around that. What paradigm is work in or has been in for the last century or two, and where is it heading now with this disruption? So I'm excited to introduce Deb Coviello here today. Deb, a lot of what Deb speaks and talks about is around mindset and leaders thinking differently going forward, and I'm really curious to see what you say here today. She's the author of The CEO's Compass, and she's known as the Drop-In CEO, your guide to getting back on track, and hosts her own podcast, The Drop-In CEO. And after 25 years in quality and operational excellence roles, Deb has a deep understanding for what's important when it comes to creating solutions for CEOs by addressing the landscape, solving their technical business issues, and elevating their people for a lasting impact and ultimately peace of mind. So welcome, Deb.
Mark, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. When you and I met, our brands are so aligned. We have our technical crafts, but ultimately it's the connection with the humans that makes it all work. So thank you again for the opportunity.
It is great. I feel like we're building a kind of a conversational field. There's a hole in the forest right now, and I'm not sure what fell. We're trying to name that, but there's an opening. So let's talk about what fell. what is not going back to normal? What broke? And how do you know, Deb? Like, what are you seeing on the ground? I want to resonate with our viewers here.
So thank you for that question. You know, what I've been thinking about is that I think we've just been woken up because any problem that we're experiencing now, the great resignation, people dissatisfied, people wanting a different lifestyle for the way they're working and integrating their personal life, it's simply awakening. The problem was always there. And I think as leaders, we've not asked enough questions to understand what are those underlying side effects that may come forth when we are faced with a significant change in our environment. Yes, we had a pandemic. That was a significant change. But I propose to you there are other significant changes on the horizon that leaders need to be asking better questions about. What else may happen? What risks are there?
Mhm.
Because what people got caught off guard was just that, the great resignation. And I think leaders who really understand this take this as an opportunity that, okay, now I'm awake. Let's not go back to sleep. Let's continue the conversation about once we settle out of the great resignation, how to retain talent and create a lifestyle that works for both their career and their personal. Keep asking more questions. What else? What else could happen? Should there be another change in the ecosystem? I think that's what leaders need to do. It's a great awakening, not just the great resignation. The great resignation
Mm.
is only one symptom. The awakening is truly the opportunity ahead of us.
It's like the provocation, right?
The
Uh,
universe is poking at us. We need to
well,
listen.
let me just kind of drop down one more level. So, how
Yeah.
do you know? What are you seeing? Do you have an anecdote or like how are you bumping into this? What's telling you we're in this time?
Well, I see it on two fronts, and thank you for that again. When I mentor, I have been mentoring some amazing subject matter experts in my field in the area of flavors. They belong to major corporations. They feel very honored to be part of those infrastructures. But when the great pandemic has come happening, they are starting to feel even more uncomfortable, even more restless. They feel even more unsupported. They may have felt unsupported before, but now it's just amplified because of the seclusion people have from the workplace. So
Mm-hmm.
again, that is the awakening. I see that in large corporations. The large companies, again, their cultures are great, but they lose connectivity with their people, and the pandemic simply amplified it. That's one
Mm-hmm.
example. These people that I'm mentoring right now are in so much need of connection, as well as evolving their capability to serve the company in the future. Otherwise, they feel like they're on hold. Now,
Mm-hmm.
another story, the small and medium sized companies. I've actually had the great fortune of servicing a company, 25 to 75 people, somewhere in that time frame. Yes, they experienced supply chain issues during the pandemic, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, but they were so connected with each other. They had each other's back. A problem arose, they were resilient, they responded, they felt supported. And yes, there were many crises, but they got through it. They didn't feel the gravity of the great resignation.
Mm-hmm.
They were more resilient. So I
Mm-hmm.
propose to companies, yes, as you grow, you should, and that's wonderful, but don't lose the connection with the humans that you may have had in earlier days when you were smaller and more intimate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've bumped into some things that are really quite surprising. That I met up with a group of people that were department leaders, a series of direct reports underneath a VP, and I was leading the kind of 3 day opening leadership development seminar for this next period of time, this restructuring that we're doing. And they said they had never gathered like that in the history of working together, like 15 years. And there was this huge history of reorgs and restructuring and kind of being like the bastard child because they didn't have a direct client facing, customer facing role. They were internal, a cost center. Um, and so they didn't get much attention and certainly were not invested in. And yet, of course, they're vital to making tools and engineering for this company to run super well. This is a giant company, but I was shocked that they had never invested in actually getting together ever. So they didn't know each other. They never asked developmental questions of each other. They never leaned on each other. They were decidedly in silos within a small organization of 200-300 people. So that obviously was going on for a long time, and now that's broken because now it's worse. Now it's worse than that, and they're not getting things done. So people are getting sick. I'm seeing people who are just continually trying to get back to their workload, and they're sick for 2-3 days.
Mm,
So there is kind of a paradigm of, well, at the lowest level, it's a paradigm of extraction, right? And I think we can see the strong limitations to that, but there is a case to be made that people feel replaceable.
mm,
A paradigm up from there would be like try to reduce harm. Reduce harm strategies is a paradigm. Sometimes people come in, so you get like rules and like regulations and agreements on things, maybe out of HR, but you're still not developing people.
mhm,
And then there's like another strategy, another paradigm, which does do good things, but it can be weak in the sense that it's more fragmented and prescribed, like happy hour Fridays, where one size fits all, like this is going to be great. We're going to get together and like socialize over Zoom on Fridays. Um, that's not scratching the itch for everybody either.
no.
So fundamentally, what I'm seeing is missing is uh, there is no real strong history of building the capability to develop humans. And that's a big gap. There now we leap over into a whole other paradigm of evolving capacity. So that's what I think we have to offer here, as experts outside of a system, is how can we bring generative and developmental approaches to human leadership development, like we've never seen before. Like it should be like, I don't know how to do that.
If I could react to that,
Yeah.
it before you even go there to the tactical, and again, I appreciate you going at the different levels that it starts to manifest itself. I think the broader question is how we just see people. So we bring people in to perform a transaction. Yes, some of those transactions may be strategic in nature, but we bring people in with the greatest of intention. You invest money to recruit those people, but then do they ever take the time to develop an ecosystem for which to foster and continue to one, check in and then develop where one needs to be developed? Instead, they fall to the mindset that, oh, and over time, people fall into three buckets: the poor performers, the steady eddies, and then the high performers. And then we accept that narrative and then we treat them as such. We'll give extra treatment to the high performers. We love the steady eddies because we don't have to worry about them. We can just let them do their transactional work. And then we have an expense when it comes to those that aren't performing. And I think what we need to think about is people as investments, just like our intellectual property, whether it's a technology or a process or a patent. Because as soon as we start raising humanity, and I talk about this in the CEO's Compass, to understanding the pride of the people, which is their intersection of their humanity and intellectual property,
Mm-hmm.
not subject matter expertise. We do celebrate our subject matter experts, but they almost sound like a commodity. When we
Mm-hmm.
think about people in terms of intellectual property and how do we protect those investments,
Mm.
then you don't necessarily have to think about a lot of other things. If you start with that question, then it spawns the question of, well, then what do we need to do in terms of mentorship? Do we know how to provide feedback in a context that is actionable versus, hey, we are doing fine? I think there's a great mindset shift that people need to make. Take care of the humans, protect their investments, support them, ask questions like, do you have everything you need to be successful? And that's not just reserved for the high C-suite people, but even the rank and file that are closest to your customer. Because if
Mm-hmm.
they don't have everything they need, they're left alone, they're not given the feedback they need, your customer is going to feel that stress in your organization. So leaders, ask the question, how do I protect my investments? The human capital first, not necessarily the product or service I deliver, because I promise you, the people will ultimately take care of you if you take care of them.
I'm excited to drop into that conversation about the ecosystem development,
Yeah.
because I like systems. I like enduring solutions.
Mhm.
And there's so much traps around putting the old wine in a new bottle. That's It's limited by the paradigm or the mindset. You don't
Yes.
realize that you're just literally doing the same thing as before. So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the process of mentoring. I have a huge history around that. But before we go into solutioning, and let's get a little context on your background. So how did you get here? You weren't born a consultant. You weren't born a drop-in CEO. Uh, what's your background on your personal story and how you got here? I'm curious.
Well, I appreciate that question. And you got me actually thinking. I'm going to give a different response. But I think
Good.
one of the things that is consistent is you can't keep me down.
Mm.
I'm always talking. And as a child, I had that gift of always asking why. Challenging the status quo, I would ask why. I don't understand. Please explain it to me. No, just accept it. Deb, be quiet. And then I'd ask the question or speak my mind, say, gee, this is not what we agreed to. Is this the best approach? I think one, I think one of the things is
What
that
age is
society,
that? I want a picture. Is that like 10 or 12?
well, I mean, again, ask my mother. I know she's watching this right now. I always asked why. And, society wasn't always ready for the person that asked why or thought differently. So fast forward, a STEM professional later went into operations and manufacturing and honing my craft and getting my certifications and gently moving into higher level roles within operations, leveraging my background in operational excellence and quality. But it was one of those things, fast forward, as I got to the vice president of quality, the vice president of operational excellence, that I realized there's a lot more smarter people than I, and I can't necessarily solve all the problems. So that's a point where a leader gets a little insecure, but then they start going through this transformation of if I have really smart people around me, I can no longer solve the problems, but I can solve problems through people. And so I started evolving my leadership style. Well, how best can I remove their barriers as well as elevate their confidence and their capacity and capability? Mentoring, coaching, giving feedback, removing the barriers, helping them to paint the future, having more influential messages. I really saw that, as well as my role as a leader was more about what's my purpose, what's my why, what outcome do I want to achieve versus just the transactional results. That was the beginning of the end of me then starting my consulting business and
Mhm.
realizing I can serve small and medium sized companies, large ones too, that are open to thinking differently, have the awareness to say, I need somebody to come in and help solve a business problem. So that's corporate courage. I talk about that. But the other thing that I do that I think is a little bit unique to my brand, and again, aligned with yours, is we'll solve a business problem, a certification, a customer has a new requirement, loss of a leader, we need a strategy. There's always a business solution, but I always leave a lasting impact because we have to give people the capacity to be able to work within this new state. We're now working at a higher level of performance. We have our certification. We've got a roadmap and strategy. But if you don't develop the people, you leave as a consultant and the thing falls. And so then you blame the consultant, or did we not take care of the people to be able to respond in this new environment? That's what makes the drop in CEO brand a little bit different and why I think differently and how I serve others.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. There's unfortunately it's maybe it's not intuitive, people want to go right to the tactical solution,
Yeah,
but we're kind of talking to consultants right now, but maybe this is education for leaders that
it is.
strategy uh it begins the rethinking, and then the leadership is carries out the strategy. It's the being body. So it's almost like strategy is like the shift in will and kind of a new intelligence, new information, new approach. But the leadership is the being body that needs to carry that out. So if we don't take care of our body, for example, we don't have the instrument to do our work in the world. It doesn't matter how much purpose we have. We're
No,
sick and broken all the time, or we're sabotaged by our inability to eat, sleep, and exercise or something. And then the
yeah.
functionality, then the operations is kind of like the third thing that comes after that. Because that's what rolls out, through leadership is operational development, which has a reflection of the original strategy, right?
If I can reflect upon a story. So I was in service to a plant manager, and They were rapidly growing the operations, but one of the assignments they said was, we need you to help evolve the senior leader, create a roadmap so that they're not just operating in the day to day. The person didn't have succession planning. They weren't coaching and mentoring their people. They didn't have a framework to say, here's where we're going versus just reacting in the day, which was the culture. So I was given the task of trying to evolve that leader, and also a junior specialist help develop their capability. And the interesting outcome of painting a roadmap for both of these individuals, helping them to see the future and enabling them to execute, there was one different ingredient between the two people. One was highly successful, and the other one reverted back to their ways of working. A leader, and again, a leader needs to recognize this in their leaders. Does the leader have the awareness that they need to change and want to change, because it's more destructive to stay where you're at versus take the courage to move forward and try something new? And when
Mm,
I was coaching these two leaders, and I saw them as a leader, even though one was very junior, the other leader, the higher level leader we wanted to develop, said the right things. They followed the proposal. But when I left, they went back to their old ways of working.
mm,
I don't think they truly were at a point in their life to embrace change and a new way of working.
mm,
Sometimes you can't fix people, or maybe we need to spend more time giving them feedback. And then the junior person asked me the questions. Deb, what do I need to do? What
mm.
do I need to do to have a greater impact? I'm going to be seeing the senior level people. I'd like to rehearse with you so that I can get
Oh,
a different outcome.
oh, nice.
Oh my, this person. And again, asked leaders, look in your
Yeah,
organization to
yeah.
find the leaders of tomorrow, not necessarily by their pay grade or their title, but the person asking the right questions and having the
Yes.
courage to take a risk. That person, when we were done, they had new capability, and they also had a sense of confidence. They said, you know what? I may not have gotten the result with that leader, but I know who I am, what I stand for. And if I can't make an impact here, I'm going to make an impact someplace else. Ooh, a leader's delight. And so, what I ask people to do is look around, really look hard and see who your leaders are. Have the courage to help maybe develop those that can't quite see what the future look like. And oh my, those people that really have those ideas and have that grit, celebrate them, leverage them. They may be your future leaders. They're just not there yet and may need that treatment and ecosystem to evolve them. So I've seen that awareness, ready to change, that
Hmm.
spark.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really great. A lot of invitations there and a lot of openings for growth.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's fundamental, right? What's the saying? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. The internal will of the learner is table stakes for education.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think this could be a paradigm issue in business. I'm kind of hooked on this today of paradigms because
Yeah.
it's something we can't recognize, that a filter that we're looking through all the time. And some of the big complaint right now is that the history of business being generally transactional
Yes.
and not developmental has had an impact on the thinking of solutions, that we could just replace people, right? But if you have a culture that just treats people as replaceable, you don't really have the attraction of talent because they're like, I'm not going to succeed in there. Or you don't retain them because now that we have this new break, people are like, this culture is not going in the direction that I want to go as a leader. So that person who's really hot to trot, they're not going to stay under that manager for long, because what do they say? That people don't quit companies, they quit bad managers. So if they can't get relocated, they're out of there. And look at the data. So here, the data, let me just drop into this for a second because this is like really amazing. Okay, so I'm referencing this Forbes article,
Yeah.
and it's got like just three major messages that are really engaging. The first is that what we've been talking about, this isn't a new thing. This isn't a flash in the pan thing that's going away. This is this big wake up call um, that, you know, whether you thrived or languished during the pandemic, there's this larger trend going on. And it speaks to the very heart of the employer employee contract, the unofficial contract. There's something back in April, there was 9 million job openings and a record 4 million people quit. And I think there's something like 10 million now and 8 million. I mean, it's just like the numbers post September, we thought oh, this is all going to quiet down once the money runs out. Nope. The gap is still there.
Mhm.
So it's like, what do we need to do here? Because the old methodologies, the old paradigm, Einstein said this, right? It's not going to solve the current issue. So I like to kind of like poke at that a little bit. Am I in a paradigm that's not congruent with what needs to happen going forward? That might create an invitation to learn.
I love poking. So thank you for the invitation. I've had definitely some thoughts around how we treat people in the workplace. And I have two things I like to talk about is corporate destabilization, but I also like to talk about how we think about people, and I talked about this before in terms of do they really fall into a bell-shaped curve? That's what we've been told.
Okay.
But I honestly believe when we bring people into an organization, they all have the potential of being a high potential performer. And when we're told, oh, they need to fit in a 9 box, if that's your HR approach, or they have to be on a bell shaped curve for which we need to remove the top lower 10% and develop the top 10%. And let's not worry about the middle. And people accept that narrative, and then that's what you get. So if you change your mindset, everybody can be a high performer. Oh, that's not possible. Well, wait a second. Why do you adopt that narrative? That's what you've been told. I propose to you look at everybody as a high performer. They simply need a different type of feedback. And by the way, ask yourself, do you have regular meetings, one on ones with your direct reports? And do you have a framework or the skill set to be able to provide feedback? And if I may go there just a moment further, let's talk about feedback. Don't say, hey, how's it going? Or, and just say they're fine. Or if somebody says, how am I doing? And you say, okay, great. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, or let me get back to you. That's when you do a disservice to the people because they're hungry. They're coming to you. They want the feedback. And I'll just give you a couple, three things to think about. Change giving feedback to a positive experience, something that's actionable. And when we give feedback, and again, we should be doing this across the landscape, what should we continue? What should we start doing? And what should we change? And what I mean by that is when we give somebody feedback, what to continue, that's a superpower. That's a strength. Lead with that. It leads with a positive experience. You're a great public speaker. Keep doing that. I want to see more of that. And then what should you tell them to start doing? And again, very positive experience. You're already a good speaker, perhaps. You could start presenting or training over there. There's a group over there that could definitely leverage your skill in being able to speak, connect, and train with others. That enhances what you're already doing well. And the last thing that you could do in terms of, again, a tool to provide feedback is what to change. Stop calling it constructive criticism. That's got a negative vibe, but think about it differently. What could you change? What could this person change in what they're doing that if they don't change, might not hurt them now, but if they stop doing it, if they change it now, it could detract from what they're already doing well. So maybe this person that's a great speaker, they connect with the humans, but they're always doing something with their hands, touching their back pocket or something like that. It could be taking away and people looking for just small details to detract. It could lose somebody. So I propose when we think about developing humans, do we even provide feedback and do we do it in a way that's actionable and positive? Take away the fear, we might serve our people a little bit better.
I love this. This. I want to go down this rabbit hole. Why not? This is
Okay,
this is kind of
sure.
getting to the mentoring that we were talking about.
Yeah.
But I want to connect a few dots. So see if you can kind of like hold these
Okay.
things free. So so one is, all right, how do we develop employees? This is kind of the arc here. There's a belief system here
Mhm.
that you're challenging, which I love, which is people are fixed. You're challenging this belief that people are fixed. And the thing about paradigms is we don't know that we hold those beliefs, you know? Um, so you bump into them once in a while. Like, for example, the old thing of like you go home to your family, after being in college or like as a young adult or maybe later in life, and you get the experience that people still see you as the person you were 10 years ago, even though you went through all this development, you know?
Mm.
And so you have this experience. I don't know if you've ever had that, but typically with family, they kind of like want to get you in the box and be like, I know who you are. And I believe underneath that is that if they really did stay with all your changes, they would have to keep changing. And I think that's really the hook underneath all that stuff. The reason why I want people have this fixed mindset is because they don't want to change. They put it on you though. That person's always underperforming, and I would have to do work in order to see them differently. But I love that you're making a case for there's a huge upside to seeing people as capable. It's expensive to replace employees. It's
Yes.
expensive to lose employees when you put them in a box. Um, so that's key. The other thing that I'm seeing around this is not just that people have potential, but everybody is unique. And I think this is tightly tied in here, but it's not always like explicitly mentioned. And I loved your story in the beginning when you were saying, this is what I was like when I was young. My mom always said, or I remember this experience, I'm poking at it sounded like you were a dropping CEO at home, You're like, okay, we made this agreement. Why is this not happening? What's going on here? Like, that's super unique to you. That kind of, what did you say? Like, I am always, you know, asking the question, right?
Asking why, couldn't keep me down, couldn't
Yeah,
shut me up.
can't keep me
Yeah.
down. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that life force energy. So the consideration here is, are you able to illuminate all of your direct reports and image the uniqueness that each one of them carry
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
as an
I've got,
image? And if you can't, maybe you're thinking of them as their job, right? And then when you get to the
yeah.
one-on-one, now you bump into it again. How do I develop this person? Well, the last person who had this job position, I coached them to do this, so I'm going to coach them to do this again. It's like, that's not really meeting that person's development. So we've got potential, uniqueness, and then this developmental edge. And I found that people, this is the thing I want to go into some nuance. I find that managers, with their direct reports, they don't know how to ask that edge question. They don't know how to discern where they're, um, like if they're the steady eddies, you were saying, like, maybe there's an edge there that would kind of like bump them out of automatic into something a little more like exciting, but they don't know how to find that little spot because they're guessing. So
Exactly.
there's a piece in here around, it's kind of the small courage. You're having a one-on-one and you have to ask a question versus give an answer.
Absolutely.
That's terrifying. I don't know why, but like I was like, hey everybody, I'm in Nike. I'm like, hey, we're gonna practice open-ended questions. And this is what an open-ended question sounds like. You're asking an open-ended question when you have no idea what the other person's going to say. It
Yeah.
doesn't railroad into a yes or a no, and then you're still sitting there like, okay, that didn't really go anywhere. And so we had some content that they were working on, but in any time that you're doing work, underlying your one-on-one meetings is like, who's this person? How's this person unfolding? How's this person doing their job? What's fresh to ooh, look, ooh, there's that cool quality again that just popped up. Well, what's that? Right? So I gave them this assignment and we're doing a pair sharing. They come back and I'm like, what was your experience of that? And immediately are like, that's much harder than it seems. I don't know how to ask an open question. And I was like, wow. So that's a capability issue right there.
Y- Yes. You bring up a really good point. And would it be appropriate if I just jump in where I
Yeah, I
did
want to.
that? I
This
mean,
is important. I
yeah,
think
I
when it
mean,
comes down to it, we can talk all day about developing people, but what if we're hinging on these kinds of issues?
so again, you talk about holistic leadership. And one thing I would propose to people is when you engage with people, don't look at, okay, I've got 60 minutes here to have a conversation. Let me get through the feedback, make sure I ask about that report. Did they get that done? And do they need any help? One of the things is that you need to be able to see and feel the entire human. So, one is asking better questions, developing the capability to really listen and hear what is and isn't said,
Mm,
and then see the gifts in that person that they're just not showing up with. So, A quick story. I had an amazing subject matter expert who was employed under me to be able to serve customers. They were kind of like a one-on-one concierge customer relationship person. The
Mhm.
technical, tactical work that they had to do is customers would come in with requests, and she got a lot of them. And her value, as she saw her value, was how quickly could she get around, turn those requests in a timely fashion. And if she could faster than anybody else, that's where she saw her value. And she was getting very frustrated because the number of requests were going in. So she was so frustrated about her job. I asked a lot of questions. Well, what would it look like? What kind of help do you need so that you're not frustrated, that you have the help that you need? And she was able to articulate that response. I said, great, let's assume we got that out of the way.
Mm.
What do you love doing? Again, not actually the work. She's like, oh, I love dealing with customers. I love partnering with them and being able to work on new projects for the future. I said, great. Then what would enable you to do that? Well, I need more of this technical stuff off my plate so I can spend time. Great. How many people do you actually do that with now? Oh, I only do that with 3 major customers. I said, but how many should we be doing it with? Well, I could count about 9 or 10. And if we did this, we would have a better outcome. We might get a better position in our core supplier list. I said, okay, that's the work that we need to do. So what we did was, one, we asked some very well placed questions, change what their value is from just delivering technical information on a day-to-day basis, the commodity in the person, to I asked for their opinion. What would a better outcome look like? What would the future look like if you could do X? And then I found what her passion was. So it's her
Mhm.
strength, very customer oriented. Her passion, she wants to connect with more people to make a greater impact. You know
Right.
what? We fixed those problems. She was able to now spend more intimate time with our customers, connecting, and a few where we weren't on the core supplier list. By that relationship and giving them that connection and service, we then got on the core supplier list. Talk about serving our people by asking better questions and seeing for them what they really should be doing.
And tied to serving customers and your story, and tied to business
Mhm.
outcomes, right? So
Yes.
that's because a lot of times I think the case is not made, or maybe this is an objection, is that, well, so what if we develop employees? What's that got to do with where our business is going? So that's like often the work is like connecting those two things. And in this story, it's a
Yeah.
great one. You can imagine the benefit of that.
Yeah. I mean, it all starts with, we forget about small villages and communities. I mean, people really, really relied on everybody. One person gave the milk. One was the doctor. One was the lawyer. One made the bread and all of that. And we depended so much on each other. And we had to check on people if they didn't show up one day to bring the milk, to bring the bread, or what have you. And we forgot about that. We figure we're a sophisticated society. We've got technology to connect with people. But you know what? I propose to leaders, what do you need to do to get connected? I have once interviewed somebody recently. He went from 15 employees, he's up to 80. And one of the things that keeps him up at night is I don't know everybody anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that really bothers me. So I make a special effort. Again, Jack, shout out to Jack. I make sure that when at Christmas time, we get something that's very custom and personal to them. And I'm also trying to make sure that my message and my vision for the future through my leaders is getting down to the people.
Yeah.
That's what he fears, is losing the connection to the human as he grows big. And I think leaders should take a bit of advice from the smaller companies before you get too distant. You see people as a commodity. And you know what? When people leave, now you got a crisis. Isn't it worth investing a little bit of money, time, and capability
Yeah.
now
Yeah,
before
I
it's an
love this.
expense?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love this image of the village.
Oh, yeah.
That resonates with me a lot because of my background in community work.
Yeah.
And what I know from 25 years of working in communities is a lot of them are fragmented and broken.
Mhm.
And there's history of communities being stable. The idea of the village is something we can image, but for a lot of people, they're moving all around. There's a lot of destabilization, and people aren't as interdependent as they used to be. There's I don't know, perhaps with consumption has come this sense of autonomy or independence. Um, Comfort is undermines community at some point because we're not relying on each other. I can think of like rural communities or neighborhood blocks where there's problems going on and you can't solve them by yourself. that's what builds community. You need a process, but you have to have a challenges that are collective geographically to work on. So there is a fulfillment, I think, of your ability to serve and care about other people. And I've been mentioning these terms. I haven't revealed the map, but it's basically principles of a living system. One was
Yes.
essence, one was development, the other was potential, and the one I'm thinking of now is reciprocity. So what's interesting about a
Yes.
village, is that we contribute to the whole from our place of uniqueness. That's our ultimate fit. The survival of the fittest is not
Mhm.
most competitive. It's actually the key word in that sentence is fit. So, you're when you're working with that employee, they were wanting to do things quicker, but you started matching their unique contribution to the fit of the organizational needs. And they're going to be non-displaceable in that spot. You know what I mean? And there's other aspects to that between the company and the market. You want to be non-displaceable, but you really got to know your relationship to the audience and the buyers and stuff. But reciprocity in a village sense is we give to the whole, but we don't necessarily get good pro quo right back. And I think that's part of what builds a culture. It's like, oh, we
Mhm.
do things like this around here. What goes around comes around. Um, do you see companies doing that well, or do you think that's a gap that needs capability building?
Well, I don't want to profile it, but I will see that larger companies have lost their connectiveness to making sure that everybody is given their due respect and informed and aligned and know what's going on in the entire community. I had the good fortune of working with a really great leader, but I think they missed the mark. We were talking about strategy, and I was like, wow, this is a great strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. Large organization, about 1,000 people in North America. I said, we should be sharing this strategy so people get a
Yeah,
greater understanding of where they fit into the
right.
context. And they said, yeah, but let me worry about that. I need them heads down getting the results,
Ooh.
meet the budget. And it was like, okay. So, first of all, I understood. I didn't argue. I sought to understood. And yes, you need people keeping an eye on the strategy and steering the ship, but we missed an opportunity to connect the community with it and then even ask the question, what can they do to support this? Not just heads down, because that's all you're going to do is get that result. But if you ask them a question and say, we're going to grow our footprint, we may be acquiring another company. What would it look like in your role if all of a sudden your work went, doubled? What would we need to do differently in order to make sure you were successful? They don't ask those questions. And then the medium-sized company, and again, I wish and hope as companies grow, they maintain this, but the small and medium-sized companies, they get their leaders together and they say, what are the risks? What risks do you see in each of your
Yeah, they
area of
involve
the
them, right?
organization? Yeah. And then the interesting thing is, I went through this exercise with all of them, and they all highlighted different risks, and a lot of them very similar, which meant they were already a very connected workforce leadership because they already saw the risks in each other area. And then the senior leader asked one other question. I said, as we get prepared for this change, I helped them with a certification. I said, we need to make sure we talk to all of our people and let them know what we're going through and the reason why this new change in direction is important to our customers in the future of the company. I was like, and then they proceeded and had served them lunch, explained what we were doing, and asked them to think about their role in the greater community.
Hmm.
Why, as we grow, do we lose that? And I think that's one of the biggest things leaders awaken to the fact that even if you've lost that, even if you've lost the sense of community, you can go back now and try to recreate that. You
Hmm.
can go back and create a sense of community, understanding, and alignment of what you're trying to do up and down and sideways.
Yeah, yeah, that's a different kind of leader. Right away, I solicit people's thinking and reflection on our big picture strategy versus command and control, do as I say, is like fork in the road, in terms of leaders.
It's what can I do to build the community that thrives now and in the future and can see the risks and see the opportunities and start responding to them now. Don't wait for the next supply chain issue, a loss of a leader, change in some federal policy or what have you, and then be shocked. You should be always asking the question, be asking those risk decisions, awaken, And just know that people development is a huge part of it because you develop them, you take care of them, you've got good retention. They will continue to come back and say, we should be thinking about this, we should be thinking about that, and feed you the answers and have the courage, leaders, to listen. But first ask the
Mhm.
question, the people, what do we need to do to prepare? What do you
Yeah.
see coming?
Yeah. I feel like I've seen that gap quite a bit, more than I've seen it succeed. And I'm encouraged. This is a perfect future work conversation. Like
Yeah.
people should be writing this down if you're watching this, like, okay, how do I actually implement this and even just practice it in small groups with my direct reports or with like the entire team? Take a risk around this because more often than not, I don't see this implemented. And I hear the voice because I'm, the consultant who's doing long-term developmental work. I'm hearing all the employees like, yeah, I don't even understand the strategy. And what the impact of
Right.
that is everything we're talking about. They can't apply their uniqueness to the situation. So you kind of all your diversity is like left on the table unused. And also their motivation and their sense of meaning is instantly dropping out. And this is the being body that carries out strategy. And if the being body, the leadership group, the people are not experiencing a meaningful relationship to work, it doesn't matter how commanding and controlling you are. Like ultimately, it's just not going to work well. So that participation is it's not even an exercise in like, okay, we'll just ask them what they think, but then never do anything about it. They they actually have to have a process for considering that, and I imagine you would help them through that kind of a thing. But without that, we're really at a place where people feel isolated, disconnected, um, expendable.
And I call that corporate destabilization,
Mm,
because what it is that one, we're if we haven't shifted our mindset, again, you talked about cascading strategy and bringing the collective community and their minds to helping paint the future, to just seeing them as a commodity. What happens is then, even if you don't have that, then and you rely on the subject matter expertise of your leaders to just muscle through and get the results that you want. If they are not giving feedback, if they are not cascading the strategy, having conversations, what do they need to be successful? What do you think your role could be? If they don't see that, they see that behavior, they don't see a future for them, they don't see a connectiveness, and then they leave. And not only do you lose the bottom and the foundation because the leader themselves hasn't been evolved, but then ultimately they may leave and they just become a liability. So I think senior leaders now, again, employee retention, employee evolution, it
mm,
doesn't take a lot. Invest a little bit of your time, because I promise you it's going to be a lot less money investing some time than the expense of having to fix things, rework things, or have to hire new. You have to ask questions. I had somebody who they thought they were just a steady Eddie. I asked them some questions, found out what they were good at, and they moved from just being a average continuous improvement person to a person that loved to train others and teach them critical thinking and problem solving. We solved some of the biggest problems we had in North America that were just kind of festering there until
mm.
all of a sudden it reared its ugly head with one particular customer that was threatening really bad things to us. Those are the things that leaders don't have sight about. It's like, oh, that won't happen that often. It
Right.
doesn't happen that often. But what
Yeah.
happens is that when these things do happen, that 1 in 10, 1 in 1,000, etc., the severity is so big.
Mm-hmm.
And then you wonder what happened, just like the
Right.
pandemic. So could we avert that? Look at the people, look at the talent, put them in the right positions, get them to help solve problems better. You might be better positioned, and maybe the next oops may not be as severe.
Yep.
So
I'm right
I
there
got so
with you.
many stories about human development. Um,
Great.
yeah.
Right there with you. That's the paradigm shift, and I suppose either people are gonna use their frontal lobe and get out of the short-term thinking and be like, okay, yeah, this is likely to happen again. I believe we'll have more shocks in the future. Let's double down on our capacity, essentially. And then there are those that won't, and they won't meet their targets, or they'll become irrelevant in the market, or they'll be constantly treading water. So there we are. Choice on the road.
Mhm.
We're gonna we're gonna end now. We're towards the end of our amazing hour, and I've totally enjoyed this, Deb. And
I did as well.
if people are watching, we have live people watching here. If you want to drop some reflections in, that's great. Um, Also, if you're watching the replay, you can get in touch with us. How can people get in touch with you, Deb?
Well, Mark, first of all, this has been a pleasure. I sincerely appreciate this very intellectual but very important discussion that leaders need to be having. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. But best way to get a hold of me, start with my website, dropinceo.com, dropinceo.com. Also very active on LinkedIn. Would love for you to connect with me. Also, the book, The CEO's Compass, also on my website as well. But just, I would love to have a conversation, engage in what you are thinking, because you know what? You need the courage to think differently and ask the right questions. You'll be the leaders of tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, Deb. And tomorrow we have Brandon Chestroni, who will be also rocking this conversation. So I look forward to that. And then I do a piece on Wednesday about how we implemented these at Google and Nike this past couple of years. So if you're watching this replay, those have yet to come. Thanks so much, Deb. Ciao for now.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Take care.